Hello, and welcome to the Polk Pioneer Oral History Program, a collaboration between the Polk County Historical Association and its heritage partners, the Polk County History Center, and Polk Government TV. I'm Jennifer Bush, a board member of the Polk County Historical Association. Thanks for joining us today, as I have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Lemuel Baylis Carnes III, who has been nominated for Polk Pioneer by the Davenport Historical Society. First of all, let me say, Mr. Carnes, congratulations on this top honor, and thanks for joining today to share some of your life stories.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Tell me about when and where you were born.
I was born June the 25th, 1934, in Greenville, South Carolina.
So if you were born in South Carolina, how did you make your way to Polk County in Florida?
Well, first of all, my dad worked for road contractors that were building highways like Tamiami Trail, road from Tampa to Jacksonville, highways through Florida. He worked for them for years and got to the point where he would order the aggregate materials because they would mix all the concrete right at the road, at the end of the road. Well, they didn't have ready-mix trucks back in those days. So they found themselves up in the Carolinas. It was Depression. He lost his job. He was having a rough time. And so my mother called her sister that worked for a gentleman in Thomasville, Georgia that had a sand mining company. And so they were having trouble with me because I weighed less than my birth weight a few weeks after I was born, and they found out I wasn't getting enough nourishment. So they put me on a cow's milk formula. I got pneumonia, had a lot of problems. So finally an old doctor came along, put me on goat's milk, and I survived. So they were having a tough time. So anyway, her sister worked for Mr. Dawes down at Dawes Silicon Mining Company in Thomasville, Georgia, and she asked him if he would interview my dad because he had experience with building the highways and everything in concrete. And so he interviewed him and hired him as a bookkeeper. After 6 months, he put him over everything he had. And that's just the brilliance he had. So that really showed through. And in those days, it was, they had some tough times, they had some good times. But then it came to the wartime, and just before that, he had left Dawes. He had quit there and decided he wanted to do something else. So I remember the first man that called him was Mr. Watkins, who started Watkins Motor Line, and he wanted him to run a terminal for him. He did that for about a month, didn't like it at all, and they wanted him to go into the military because they were looking for people in engineering that could build things and so forth, and he had all the experience. He was born in 1900, so it's easy to keep up with how old he was about that time. And so he didn't want to go in because he said he had 2 sons, and he just didn't want to go in and get killed or something like that, I guess, and leave the family in a mess. So he took a job down in St. Mark's. And they were building these landing crafts. I remember the gentleman that owned the place was named Davenport. And my dad took ran a shift down there of welders fabricating these landing crafts because it was during World War II, and they were, the Allies, our soldiers were on those islands and everything. They had to take one by one. They used these landing crafts, and they were small landing crafts. So, but he worked there for a year or two, and then he decided he wanted to come down to Florida and go to Central Florida and start his own sand business. So he had a little bit of money, not too much, and so we got in our 41 Ford, and we came to Florida. And the first place we stayed was in what we call now the Polk, it used to call the Polk Hotel in Haines City, the tall hotels, 20 or so stories, I guess, in Haines City. We stayed there for about a month, and then because right after the war, it was in 1944, so there wasn't places to stay. Things hadn't been built and things like that. It was really tight. So finally, we went over to Davenport and stayed at the Holly Hill Inn. We stayed there for about 6 months. It was the old Holly Hill Hotel, I think, when it was new. And so now it was an older folks' home, and it was run by a religious sect that was from Laufman, I'd understood. And they, well, really Intercession City, around Intercession City. And so, anyway, so it was really an interesting place to stay. So my dad had fabricated his own drilling device. He had a typical sand auger. He would go down to the water and he'd pack all this stuff up in that Ford every day, and we'd go out, he'd pick up a helper, and he would take me with him. And if we were lucky, we put down one 55-foot hole in a day and took the pipe out, took the casing back out. I would stand on top of two 48-inch Stilson wrenches, and I'd be pulling a clothesline rope up and down that had a bucket on the end of it that he'd made out of a piece of tubing that came from a J.C. Penney department store, that where they'd send messages and money around the store.
And how old were you at that?
10. And so I went with him every day, and I'd stand on top of those Stilson wrenches. When that bucket would get heavy, we'd bring it out of there, and then he would check it he'd check everything every 5 feet. And so, like I say, we got down a 50-foot hole. That was about as far as we could go. And then he'd cut down a pine sapling, and he'd make a prize bar out of it. And he said, "Son, if you got a long enough prize bar, you can move the world." And so he'd bring it up about a few feet at a time, then he'd drop those Stilson wrenches down and catch it and keep coming up that way. So it was a long day's work. And so, but we did this for months, and he'd gotten the privilege and the right to drill on Mr. P.E. Williams' property. Mr. P.E. Williams had a big mortgage on his property with Gulf Life, I think, at the time. And I remember that he said that in later years that he had bred his cows with sand, and that's the way he paid off Gulf Life. But he told my dad, he said, "Now you can drill over here as much as you want to, because there's nothing but sand over here, and it doesn't do me any good. I can't put any cows over here," because he had a beautiful pasture land in a valley. And he had 6,800 acres. So it ran all the way across I-4, went over there where the big old truck auction place is, and all over that whole area. And so, anyway, so I remember it was so hot, and we were all so tired and everything, and I can remember the little yellow and purple blooms on the flowers that were on the weeds growing around the cactus plants. And I remember getting on my knees and praying to God that he would find sand pretty soon, because we were tired. It was a tiring thing. You go back to that Holly Hill Inn, and then, like I say, they were a religious sect that controlled it, so they'd have prayer meeting 1 or 2 nights a week. And so we had just joined the church in Thomasville before we came down here. We joined the First Baptist Church, so we got into the little church they had over in Davenport, and Dad came a deacon and a Sunday school teacher, and he would take us fishing up there in Reedy Creek, I think it was, up there towards Kissimmee, a lot of times on the weekend. I'd take all the kids up there, and because he was a wonderful person. He was good with us, he was good with his employees, he was strict, but he was fair, he was honest, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man. And so, but anyway, I enjoyed the Holly Hill Inn from the standpoint that Mr. Taylor of Taylor's Tropical Suites would come across there at lunch with his Panama hat on, and his seersucker suit, and his bow tie, and very dignified with a Cuban cigar, and then the police chief would come over, the barber and his wife, who was the city clerk, she would come over too, and everybody would gather there for lunch when we were there to have lunch. And so it was neat. And then this old guy that had a straw hat on, they called him Pops, I'd talk to him sometime, and he had ridden up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. And he would tell stories of that. So I got a lot out of it. And it's kind of like anything else. You get out of anything about what you put into it, you know. And I love talking to people and find out what they did and everything. So it was very interesting to me. And so, but anyway, my dad did find sand there after a few months of drilling. And then he worked out so that he could pay a royalty to Mr. Williams for all the sand that was mined off of his property. And so we did that for years. My dad took in a partner. He went up to, he didn't have quite enough money to do everything he wanted to do. He pretty much ran out. So he knew of a guy up in, there was a road contractor up in Ocala by the name of Carl Rose. And Rose had, ironically, he had founded Rosemere Farms, which was the first thoroughbred horse farm in Ocala up that way. He was also head of Marion Contracting Company. He owned the bank and he owned the Chrysler dealership. And he told my dad, he said, well, I've got a friend that if you would take him in with you, he could help you in your sales and all like that. And so, and that helped my dad get his loan too, so that all worked out good, and so he had a partner. And so they got, they started working on the business in probably late 44, got everything going in 45, and then my dad only lived 8 years after he got started. He died in February of 1953, and we weren't expecting it. We knew that he'd had a little heart trouble. We didn't know the extent of it. And they didn't know much as much back in those days either. And so I'd gotten a call from him when I had completed my first semester, because he wanted me to go to the University of Alabama because they taught mining engineering. It was the closest school that taught mining engineering. Well, it turns out it's coal mining, underground coal mining and stuff like that. But anyway, it wouldn't make any difference. I still had to take all these math courses and technical courses, and I got in the band because I could play the trumpet. And so I got in the band up there, and I pledged a fraternity, and I started partying some too, see. So I had to explain to my dad why my grades weren't very good after the first semester, but he surprised me. He said, son, he says, this is the first time you've ever been away from home. He says, you got a lot to learn. And he said, I understand that. And he said, you're gonna learn about people in school. He said, that's a very important thing. Well, I'd learned that because I had built my own paddle for the actives to paddle me with when I was a pledge in the fraternity. And I saw what power did to certain characters, and so it was a very interesting time. And and then we were traveling around the country, and I was taking all the hours I could take and going to school, and from can to cane it seemed like, and with a 3-hour lab about every day. And so I didn't have quite a C average after that first semester. So I told my dad I was going to work and try to do better, and he said, well, he says, just do the best you can. And he says, remember, where one man leaves off, another has to begin. Never heard another word. He was gone. And so it still hurts me so much to this day, because I was 18 years old. Everything had been pretty much rushed up and everything. And I was really where I didn't want to be. And so, you know, I went back down, came down and for the funeral, and came back. And then I went another semester and a half. I went, because I was just going into my second semester, so I went a semester and a half there. I transferred on scholastic probation down to the University of Florida, and I decided I would take business administration. So I took some accounting, I took some economics, I took some different things like that, and I loved them, and I did well in them. I didn't study any harder, but it just came easier to me. But the one thing that I did take was humanities, that I said, my goodness, I didn't know somebody had written a whole book about something I wondered about, you know? So I was really fascinated about that. So I wasn't a typical anything, you know, I don't think, but I made pretty good grades there. But I told my mother, I said I wanted to come home and go to work and do work in the business. And she said, well, you don't have to. But she was having a tough time. The partner didn't want to be in business with a woman, and they were having problems that was probably partially, it wasn't anybody particular's fault. It's just people just don't get along.
Were you the oldest of your siblings, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a brother 2 years younger, and then my sister was born when we came to Florida, so she was 13 years younger. So they had the little baby too, see, and so.
So your mom was basically there having to just, you know, take care of everything
herself. Well, what it is it was left. She was left with this business that she always stood behind her husband, but she wasn't active in the business, you know. Back then, women pretty much stayed home or were working the family. They had gotten out of the home because of the Rosie River thing in the World War II, when women came from the household and made things work while the guys were overseas fighting and everything. But it was during that transition time. And so it was a lot on her, but she was very strong. And when she started having, the partner and her had issues, Mr. Williams came to her side, Mr. P.E. Williams, and took her to a good lawyer, took her to, later on took her to a bank that could lend her the money, because they had a buy or sell thing worked out. I was there. The good superintendents left because they wasn't going to work for a 20-year-old. And anyway, it was kind of a tough time. And my mother was 13 years younger than my dad. She remarried again about a year and a half after my dad died, and so I had a stepfather involved, and so we had a lot of things going on, but we did all right, and we were able to compromise, and everything seemed to work out pretty good. But
well, tell me a little bit more about. I don't want to forget to ask you about your siblings.
Well, my brother, he graduated 2 years after I did.
And what was
then
his
he got drafted to go into the military because they had the Berlin airlift and everything. So he was in there for 2 years. So it was about 4 or 5 years before he came to work out there. Now, he and I didn't get along at all as far as our thinking, because I moved around like a donkey, and he moved like a hummingbird, you know. He wanted to flip and buy and sell and do things like that. I wanted to buy something and hold on to it forever and not ever get rid of it, you know. And so that was a hard time. And but today, I mean, I love him to death, and I, you know, am able to put everything in perspective. That, you know, people are different. There's no wrong way sometimes, no right way. It's just different ways. And you get two people, and then you start having differences. If they can compromise, you're all right. If they don't want to compromise, you're not. So, but anyway, my mother carried on the business after she bought the half of it that she didn't own. Then the business continued with the stepfather involved, and my brother came in and he was involved. My sister never was involved very much, a little bit, but not much, and because she was so much younger. And then I had a half sister. I had a new little, we had a new little baby in the family, a half sister. So there was a lot of family dynamics in there. But the business went on until in the 80s, my mother got Alzheimer's. And after that happened, then it later became, the business was owned by myself, my brother, and my sister. In 1989, let's see, 1989, let's see, it's not 1998, the business was sold. They decided to sell the business, and so it was gone. And we had some land left, and so my brother gave me, because I didn't want to sell, I got the choice of maybe keeping more land and less money, and I decided to do that. And so then I was able to buy back the industrial sand part of the business, and from the people that bought us out, because they weren't interested in that. They saw the silicosis lawsuits coming down, and they had me running it for them anyway, and I hadn't had to sign a non-compete, and they were having trouble selling it. So I got them to finance me, and then I got to go back and use my dad's old name, my dad's logo that he'd drawn up, and start again as Standard Sand and Silica Company. And so we started again in 1999. We paid off their loan and everything, because I got bank financing, and so we've grown the business ever since. But we've always grown it from either profit, making money, or debt. and I kept adding land all the time, but I didn't ever want to sell it. I wasn't like my brother. I wanted to just sell it and make money out of it. And I've sold it when I needed to sell it, but I just think a lot of times about, if I had to tell a young person what to invest in, I'd say real estate, any kind of real estate. But land is wonderful, because the payments that you make there are over a period of time, it's just going to grow and grow, and really it's like compounding interest. So I've enjoyed the business. I've enjoyed every aspect of it. I've enjoyed, because we've gotten into different things. Now we manufacture some clays, and that are used in all types of ceramics, because of the purchase of the Edgar Plastic Kiln Company quite a few years back. And then we mine gravel out in Alabama, and a lot of that gravel goes into making silicones, all types of silicones, because it's a high silica gravel, and they melt this gravel just like it was a metal in a carbon arc furnace. And from there, it gets ground up into a powder, and then it could be made into optical glass, or any kind of glass. But they don't, you would think they'd be making that glass out of fine sand, but they don't, because that wouldn't work in a carbon arc furnace. But we did produce glass sand for quite a number of years for Owens, Illinois, and Thatcher Glass over in Tampa, and for the industrial glass people down in Bradenton down there, Tropicana. Well, never sold any to Anchor Hocking up in Jacksonville.
I mean, what a lifetime in the sand mining business. But that wasn't your first job.
No, my first job.
Tell me about your first job.
My first job when I was in high school was with Publix. I took a job as a bag boy at Publix, and so and the Publix was, I think, the second one that George Jenkins built of the modern style, where you had the terrazzo floors, which weren't seen around there anywhere, white aisles, modern looking store. The store in Haines City when we moved there was an A&P. It had the old wooden floors and the old wooden counters. The floors were the type that you oiled, like you saw in school if you went to school back in the 40s or 30s or 40s or 50s. And it was a little narrow store, dark inside. And Mr. Jenkins made a store that was bright inside, a lot of fluorescent lights, and wonderful employees too. Most of the young men that worked there had a high school education. They didn't have a college education, but they were hard workers. And the grocery business is a hard business. It's low margins, high volumes, and but there were incentives for everybody there. That was, and you could work from being a bag boy to, you could be a meat market manager if you were smart enough and stayed there long enough, or produce manager before that maybe. And but Mr. Jenkins would come through there. He'd have his bow tie on, and he'd have his glasses on. He'd come through that store, and he was all business, a smile on his face. And you know, it's ironic. And Joe Blanton was his right-hand man. Joe Blanton had the Swift and Company account. And so he was a meat guy in the whole thing, and meat was very, very important. And but my mother knew Joe Blanton when she was a little kid in high school in Thomasville, Georgia. He had an old Model T that he'd ride around in, and he'd pick up a lot of kids and take them home from school sometime and stuff like that. He was a little bit older, but really nice. Well, people seemed like they were just nice back in those days, but but he was really a good guy. And but she later on ran into him and got to know Mr. Jenkins a little bit, and it's just ironic how things the way the fabric is woven in your history from areas that you never could dream things. And just like I say a lot of times, I said, the things that I had the least to do with were the things that probably made me the most money. And I don't know how you figure that out, but my dad paid $125 an acre for 1,100 acres before he died. Now that 1,100 acres is worth a lot of money today. I didn't have a thing to do with it. I tried to grow some grove on part of it and lost a lot of money on that. And I think about the things that we did, and then I think about too that on that 1,100 acres, I thought, boy, we got a lot of sand to mine. I'm gonna be there for a long time. And so when I came out of school, I said, I'm not gonna do that hand. I'm gonna get me one of these truck-mounted drill rigs, and we're gonna go out there and we can put down some holes. We can put down 10, 20 holes a day, And so I found out that out of that 1,100 acres that my dad had bought, there was only about 60 acres of it that was really good sand. So I got scared. So I was scared for a long time. So I was doing everything I could to figure out how I could sell different types of sand and get more sand per acre and go deeper. I went deeper than the sand went for a long time. And then we picked up some other acres that added to our good sand supply, and we were able to go there for years and years and years. And so now we produce products that allow us to get more yields of fine materials because we make special gradations and things like that out of those acres. So, my background really was kind of a strange background, I guess, because I love real estate, I love land, and I just love to, I said, I don't need a vacation. I've got a vacation here. I've got all this sand coming out here and this beautiful blue water out here and everything. I don't need to go anywhere. So I just love the business. And I look at, I remember my dad taking me when I was a little child, before I even started to school. He took me and showed me where he was fixing to put in another sand mine. And it's a funny thing. Years later, in the gosh, it was in the 80s, 90s, I had a chance to go back in there and buy that. And I remembered everything about that place from that time when I was a little kid, and he'd taken me to that sand mine. It's up in Georgia. And so I wanted it so bad, but there again, family couldn't agree on anything, and we decided not to do it. But
sometimes when the family, sometimes those kind of disagreements, it was a benefit later on when you see, okay, well, that was probably a good thing. Thing it happened that way.
It can work both ways,
it can work both
But the thing about it, it's really interesting, the way that things work that way. Because I remember my dad taking me to places that later on we had a chance to go in there and buy, or because we grew from the time from 1999, we got out of Florida and got into Georgia, we got into Alabama, and then we later got into Tennessee. And so I always wanted to grow the business and to do different things, and maybe I'm more of a risk taker, and and that doesn't work good with people that are very conservative sometimes. So well, anyway, I've enjoyed all of it, every bit, the good, the bad, the indifferent. I've enjoyed every bit of it, and I enjoyed Davenport because Davenport was a very unique place. My dad, when he came there, And he got a little money. Bought him an orange grove. Bought a little orange grove. Those things didn't cost much money. He could buy lots in Davenport for $60 to $80, $100 a piece. You know, with a sidewalk and a paved street. And then Mr. Henry Knapsager took him out on a little north of I-4 and 27 intersection out there, and he says, $90 an acre as far as you can see. So there was no I-4, there was no 27, there was none of that stuff, see. And sometimes you don't realize how much things have changed and what used to be there until you see again old pictures and things like that. But Davenport was so interesting. They had a swimming pool that didn't have any water in it, and hadn't had any water in it for years until I think they finally were able to put water in it. I think they said the WPA built that pool, you know, and and they had all those lots over there, and they had all these orange groves that people owned, and then Holly Hill maintained and everything. So, you know, my dad said he had to be on the railroad track. He liked it because it was between Tampa and Orlando. Liked it because it was between Jacksonville and Miami. And Disney liked it later on too. Now that land wouldn't be worth what it is. Orlando wouldn't be as big as it is. None of this area would be as big if it hadn't been for Walt Disney. And it's a funny thing, I was in the Davenport barbershop one day, and a friend of mine that was in school, he was a little older than me, but he came in that barbershop and he says, "Baylis, I've had a wonderful idea." I said, "What is that?" He says, "You know the green swamp?" He says, "That's not really a swamp." I said, I know, I've been all over it." I said, "I know it's got a lot of beautiful spots in there in between those cypress trees and everything." He said, "Well, I have this idea." So I've sent a letter to Walter Lance, and I've suggested that he come down and take a look at this and maybe make Woody Woodpecker land out of this swamp out there. And I think about that a lot of times because it was Disney that came in later on down the line, and I had passed a piece of property over there, and I think it said something about, I don't know, 12,500 acres for sale or something like that. And I got with the Florida Ranch Lands people and found out that Mr. Bronson, I think it was, he was a state senator, and he owned that land, and you could buy it. I think it's around $400, $500 an acre or something like that, and you just paid and you just paid interest on it for the first 5 years or something in that neighborhood. So it was a sweetheart deal. Well, that became the nucleus of the Disney project. So it's amazing how many different things that you run into in a lifetime that you haven't, you know.
You're absolutely right. Well, your career's been just amazing, especially learning so much of it when you were a kid, just watching your dad. But I want to ask you about, school, going to school when you were kids. What did you kids do for, I know there's a lot of work going on, but what did you kids do for fun?
Well, I tell you what we did. When we came down here to Florida, we had never seen so many lakes. We didn't have lakes like that up in Georgia. So we had our short khaki pants on, and we wouldn't wear a shirt, and we had our bicycles. And when we had our time, we'd go to these lakes with our little cane pole, and we'd catch all kind of fish. And they weren't very big, most of them. All around back in the middle of the lakes in Davenport and all around through there, as far as we could ride, because there's so many paved streets. And we'd bring those things home to Mother, and she would fix them no matter how small they were. So, I don't know. She was such a wonderful person, though, because I remember we were always thinking about doing something. We were busy. And so when we were living in Thomasville, she would boil peanuts for us, put them in a little old brown paper sack, and then take us around door to door, and we'd walk in there and sell peanuts for a nickel a bag. And I know they had to cost her at least a dime, probably. But I never will forget, go to a movie theater on Saturday, get a haircut for a quarter, get into the theater for a dime, get a big Baby Ruth for a nickel, get a drink for a nickel and a bag of popcorn for a nickel. Now, so for 25 cents, for 50 cents, you got your haircut, got into the movie too, and got all you wanted to eat.
Prices have gone up, huh?
So things have changed, you know, and I can't get over it.
How about school? You said you were in the band. Was that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened there is when we moved to Davenport, we went to and we got set there. He bought a house from the Swartzel, Miss Swartzel, right dead across the street from the entrance of the old schoolhouse in Davenport. It was a wooden house.
So I guess that means you could never play hooky if you were right across from the school.
No, but I'll tell you what you could do is you could play on that campus out there. And on the every weekend they'd have a football game right in front of the schoolhouse of kids out there tussling and fighting and going on. And then you'd see some people come to town that were a little bit oversized for the grade they were in sometime. And one old boy, I said he could kick the air out of that football. He kicked that football so far. And I remember when we came down here, we had on short pants and little shirts and all like that, and these kids were wearing coveralls, barefooted, running through the sand spurs. And the first thing that happened when we got to school is a circle of them got around us, and you had to fight your way out of it, because that's just the way it was. And so we got a big cultural shock when we came down here. Not that we had any money to mount to anything or anything like that, but these people, they had some pretty rough lives, you know, back in those days. And that's why today I see some of these people that had held on to land for years and years and years and years and years and make nice big sales over the last 20 years now. And it just makes me feel so good to see that happen, because they just love to see that. So it's been a wonderful time.
Something else I want to ask you about was your marriage and your children.
Now you're getting into the bad parts, my bad side, because I married my first wife, and we had 5 children, and then we were married. We were married in 1957, and I divorced her in 1984, and then remarried again in 1984. Didn't have any children by that marriage, but had a couple of, you know, she had a couple of children, and then I've got a grandchild that I'm really close to today that helps me a lot out of that marriage. And then she and I are not together, but I think the world of her, and same way with my first wife. I think the world of her, and do anything I can to help her anyway, and work with her anyway. So I've had good relationships and everything, but I thought I would probably have one marriage, and I probably would never, you know, be married but one time. So that hadn't worked out well. So, but I don't really have any complaints. You know, I'm kind of hard-headed about the way I do things sometime, and the way I wanted to see things sometime, and so.
Well, we covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you about? Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to mention?
No. I think, though, I still have the same ambition that I had when I was 20 years old. I still get the same enthusiasm about accomplishing and doing things, and I see so many opportunities and everything, and so sometimes it's hard to change, and to see. For me, it's hard for me to sell anything, because I kind of fall in love with possessions, yet I know that I'm not going to take anything with me, And so I'm going through a time right now that's a hard time for me. It's an adjustment time when I've got to, and sometimes just back off and get away from the business probably, but I don't look forward to that day because, you know, other than looking at land, I get so much from looking at land. I think I can breathe it in and breathe it in and out and just feel refreshed. And I love animals, so I raise a few cows, but I don't like seeing them have to be slaughtered. And yet I like beef, so I'm a hypocrite. So, but I love animals, and that's a thing that's been close to me all my life. And I love nature. And so I think I want to always be around where there's land and there's opportunity and nature. And the thing I love about our business, I always used to say, somebody's going to make more money out of the real estate that after we get through mining than we ever made out of the mining business. And I still believe that today, and it seems like it's true in a lot of cases. And then I love what's under the ground. That there's so many minerals and there's so many different things you run into. Then you look at the geology and you see the ocean covered this at one time. I opened a clay ball one time that came out, and inside was a perfectly shaped little pine cone. And then I see little sea animals that were living millions of years ago. And I see areas where the ocean wasn't, and then the ocean came in and just covered up everything and put piled sand dunes up and everything through drilling the land. And so I'm fascinated by all that, and then what's happened to this earth since it was formed. I think about all those kind of things.
Well, that doesn't surprise me that you think about those things, because in your business, it wasn't just a business. Mm-hmm. It truly was a passion, and what you've contributed, and your family, to not just Davenport but Polk County. I mean, the contributions everywhere you've been. I mean, it's been a passion for you, hasn't it?
But I love Davenport. I love the people that I've met in Davenport, Haines City, Davenport, Central Florida, in that area, and I've enjoyed it, and I'll continue to enjoy it until I die. And so I just want to see more of it.
Well, you know what I've enjoyed?
What?
You know what I've enjoyed? I've enjoyed sitting here talking with you and hearing these great stories today.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, we sure do. We thank you for sharing your life stories. I mean, that's what makes you a Polk pioneer, is just sitting down and keeping the history and the heritage alive for the generations to come.
Well, I love the people in that area. I love every one of them. I think about so much different ones that are not with us anymore, you know, but what they meant to me.
Well, that concludes today's visit, talking Polk Pioneer history. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again.